So, this was an interesting video to get set as a topic. Naval actions, specifically battles, where the surprise has failed. You'd be surprised to know that that actually happens quite a lot. Sometimes because the surprise is really not as much of a surprise as they were hoping for. Sometimes because the surprise is based on very faulty intelligence, which means that frankly it was never there in the first place. And sometimes just because, well, people tend to overestimate the value of surprise in operations. Honestly, there are so many options here that I was really stuck considering what to do, which surprises to do, how to thread it together. And then I remembered. I was doing a video about the treasure fleets. Or rather, I'd been wanting to do a video about the treasure fleets. And the issues with the Royal Navy in trying to get the treasure fleets at various points, or the English in trying to get the Spanish treasure fleets at various points. And I thought, well, you know what, I could do 3 or 4 of them in this video, and it wouldn't be onerously long. It wouldn't be onerously long, was the emphasis. And so I thought, well, I'll do 3 of them. I'll do 3. A slide each, talk about the operation, talk about how the surprise failed. It'll be fun, and we'll see how it goes. It might be a 4th added in. Might be a 4th. It's going to depend how the time goes. Because I like my videos to be roughly consistent length. But, yeah. We're doing some surprise attacks that failed. This is a Saturday premiere from Carl von Gasberg. And honestly, the thing was narrowing it down to a list which I could do. So, taking it to a theme of when the English tried to surprise and failed to surprise the Spanish treasure fleets. Seemed like a novel way to tie it down into a consistent theme. And not have me jumping around and going, and once again, they failed because of the faulty intelligence. It would actually make it a bit more, well, I suppose to an extent, slapsticky. Let's start off with the Battle of Santa Cruz de Teneriffe. Yes, when Robert Blake fails to get the gold. Now, when it comes to the Battle of Santa Cruz de Teneriffe, Robert Blake is in charge. And he is backed up by Sir Richard Stainer. If you've seen my going godly for gold, you'll know who Sir Richard Stainer is. He is the person who managed to intercept a treasure fleet and make a daily profit, I must say, for the Protectorate, for the Commonwealth of England. And, well, they decide that when war's declared, war's been going on, they should try and capture the Spanish treasure fleet. They think, you know what, we're going to go for it. We almost got it. We're going to go for it properly. And they have a long discussion that, thinking that the blockade of Cadiz, whilst it was being successful, it hadn't achieved what it wanted to. And in February 1657, Blake, who's conducting the blockade, receives information that the treasure fleet from Mexico was on its way across the Atlantic. Its captains wanted to search for the Spanish vessels immediately, but Blake refused to divide his fleet and waited until the ships returned from England in order to reprovision his fleet at the end of March. He then left 2 ships to block and watch Cadiz. And he sailed from Cadiz Bay on 3rd of April 1657 to attack the fleet. He knew they would probably be going by Santa Cruz de Teneriffe, awaiting escort to Spain. He arrives there 19th of April. He arrives there bright and early, 19th of April, and he immediately has a look around. And Santa Cruz lies in an indented bay The harbour's defended by the castle San Cristobal, which has 40 guns and several smaller forts, connected by a triple line of breastworks to shelter musketeers, i.e. trenches and other systems to provide cover. At this point, therefore, he decides to carry out a raiding operation. And why is he going for the raiding operation? Well, he's done one before. He did a raid on Barbary pirates at the Battle of Port Farina in 1655, and that had worked out well for him before, so he decides he's going to do the same thing. This is not unusual at all. So he sends 12 frigates under the command of Stainer in Speaker, one of those lovely new frigates which was the Speaker class, which the Protectorate/Commonwealth had ordered a construction to improve the navy, to attack the galleons in harbour, while he would follow with his flagship, the George, and the rest of the fleet to bombard the shore batteries. Now, the first thing you should realise about the Speaker and the frigates is there is a debate as to whether they are third rates or frigates, or frigate-built ships. It's easier to imagine them as frigate-built ships, because their guns and their firepower at the time probably makes them equivalent to third rates. And they were the vast majority of the fighting force at the previous battle, in terms of the Battle of the Battle of Cadiz, where Stainer had taken the treasure fleet. So it makes sense sending them in. They're powerful enough to do the fight. Now, the problem is that when they arrive, the Spanish treasure had already been unloaded and secured ashore. Basically, they got there and the crews had decided that, frankly, you don't leave this in ships. You get it ashore. You get it ashore. And this meant that whilst there are ships waiting for him, there's no treasure. So he's failed to get the treasure. This is why it's failed. He hasn't surprised them early enough. He hasn't been able to get the treasure. They've been there, they've been unloaded. The attack itself, well, that was rather successful. It starts at 9 AM on the 20th of April. That's the Julian calendar. It would be the 30th of April by the Gregorian calendar. And Stainer leads his ships in. They managed to maneuver in quite closely alongside the Spanish ships, which were in some ways actually blocking the guns from the castle and the forts. In fact, no shots are fired from the English ships either, until they moved in position and dropped anchor. And then they start attacking the galleons. Blake's heavier ships then sail into harbour, bombard the shore defences. Blake ordered no prizes to be taken, no quarter given. They were to be utterly destroyed. This was war on an industrial total scale. This was war that had come out of the English Civil War, the War of the Three Kingdoms. And it was the model of war which was now being exported. I do sometimes find some of the recent histories of the War of the Three Kingdoms kind of funny and interesting. There was one me and Drac were reading a few years ago, which is a paper which basically suggested that the entire New Model Army was recruited and brought across from America. Sorry, no it wasn't. It really wasn't. But what was interesting was when we started looking into the to try and figure out whether there was anything to substantiate, we started looking into the population details of the various colonies in America at the time. And yes, even if you'd taken every single man from the colonies and brought them across, you'd have had trouble filling out the entire New Model Army. People forget quite how big the New Model Army is. There's the field army portion of it, but there's also the garrison parts of it, etc., and beyond that. And so New Model Army is pretty darn big and capable. Also, there's the fact that we can trace the regiments which are taken into it, and where they're recruited from, where they're trained from, where the people go, and where they live. So that's fairly settled scholarship. But hey ho. There's always interesting. This is the joy of academia, and why I don't like it when someone quotes to me and goes, "Well, this is what some recent scholarship says," and I go, "Is that recent or is that settled scholarship?" Settled scholarship is, we now have agreed the major points, we're now arguing over the details. Recent scholarship means, I've got a bright idea and I'm going to try and rewrite everything for it. It might be right, it might be correct, it might not. Let's work it out over the next 10 years. But as the Spanish fleet, which was mostly made up of their small armed merchant vessels, were quickly annihilated by the well-trained gunnery of Stainer's warships, some galleons fought on for several hours, but most of their ships were getting pummeled out quite quickly. Blake's division managed to clear the breastworks completely, annihilate the smaller forts, and at this point there's also smoke from the gunfire and burning ships were actually obscuring the English ships from the Spanish batteries. So previously they'd been obscured by the Spanish ships. Now they're obscured by the smoke and fire from the Spanish ships. About 1200 hours, Don Diego Degas' flagship catches fire. He's the Spanish admiral, and she's destroyed when her powder magazine goes boom. When that happens, it's really not good. At this point, the English fleet is ordered to boats to board the Spanish ships and set them on fire themselves to make sure they burn properly. By 1500 hours, all of the 16 Spanish ships in the harbour had been sunk, were ablaze, or some were actually surrendered, about to be put ablaze. There is a debate as to whether some Spanish vessels survived the attack. I think possibly they did, but I don't think they were in the main harbour. I think any ship in the main harbour was a goner. And that's fair. But there are other places where they could have been. And I think sometimes people forget this wasn't a full invasion of the whole of Teneriffe, so that would explain to me the discrepancy. Because ships in the harbour, they're going for them. They are literally gunning for them. Unless they are very small and able to be tucked up inshore, but no. Swiftsure and 4 of the other frigates had taken a surrendered ship each as prize and attempted to tow them out the harbour. Blake, in a forerunner of Cunningham and ordering a certain aircraft carrier out of the line at the Battle of Cape Matapan, had to repeat his order several times before the captains burnt their prizes. The reason he was doing this was he didn't want to have to return to England. He wanted and didn't want to send this, to weaken his fleet by sending ships back to England or escorting prizes back to England or sending crews on the prize ships back to England. He wanted to get back to his blockade of Cadiz. It was a professional fleet, a professional action. The English fleet managed to withdraw from the harbour, firing on the fort, still suppressing them, and they were helped by the wind because it shifted from northeast to southwest, exactly right time to carry Blake out the harbour. There is a debate about this as to whether it's the case or not, but, and I will say this as a big, glorious Glutamus Maximus of a butting point, they do seem to make very good progress both in and out of the harbour, and winds can change. It doesn't take much of a wind to give an advantage to frigate-built ships at this period. The fleet worked their way out to sea, using various methodologies to maximise that wind and maximise that. I don't think it was necessarily a perfect wind either way, because they do describe themselves as, to an extent, some points having to warp, sometimes having to haul on anchor ropes, sometimes doing all sorts of things. Again, this is stuff they'd done at Porto Farina, but realistically, it should have taken them longer if they were just hauling. If they were man-drawlicking and all, it would have taken longer. So there must have been some level of wind behind them both ways. Speaker, Stainer's flagship, which had been the first to enter the harbour, is the last to leave, and is also the most damaged ship. But none of the English ships were lost in the battle. None. It was a good victory. It was presented in England as a victory over 16 Spanish galleons. Not quite correct. What it wasn't was a capture of the treasure fleet. And so when Blake dies on 7th of August 1657, he has yet still to capture a treasure fleet. And he actually dies while sailing home. He's taking 11 ships back home. He'd done, in the meantime, another voyage to Salé in Morocco, where he managed to, by, let's say, treaty means, get a load of English slaves released. This was another legacy of the Protectorate / Commonwealth period. They were very active in preventing their people being taken as slaves, and they actually did solve the problem, which had been originally used as justification for the ship money, i.e. the defence of the Cornish and the southwest coast from slavers. They'd actually done that. That had been a major reason for Charles I to be justifying his need for ship money, had been the various problems with slaves and slaving boats coming up to the Cornish coast and taking people, and they'd actually solved it. The Cornish themselves had hired some locally sourced individuals who were very, very determined to make sure no ships got into their waters, but Lord of them, the government of the Commonwealth Protectorate, i.e. Oliver Cromwell, did actually deliver on it. Did actually send something in. Well. Next one, the Blockade of Porto Bello. So this is a later attempt, conducted by, well, Rear Admiral, later Vice Admiral in the same mission, Francis Hosier. Yes, Francis Hosier. He was supported by Edward St. Lo and Edward Hobson, and he brought 11 ships of the line, a frigate, 2 sloops of war, a snow, and nearly 5,000 men with him. Facing at Spain and Antonio de Gastania, and roughly 2,000 troops. The thing is, the British mostly die due to yellow fever. There are 4,000 plus men who die. 4,000. They have an excellent plan. They have excellent intelligence. They've really studied it in depth, and they are pushing hard. Pushing hard for what would be supposedly a victory. They've actually had a detailed report produced. A report produced by a guy called Woodes Rogers, who was, well, former privateer, governor of the Bahamas, and who, along with a Captain Jonathan Dennis, wrote a nice report about the Spanish. This report is actually listed, and you can actually go and track down and read this report in the British Library. There are also various comments of it online, including a nice transcript of it sitting actually in Wikipedia for some reason. But I'm going to read about one passage from it. My lord, what seems to us most likely is that Castaneta, after refreshing at the Havana, may go to La Vera Cruz, and there wait for the bullion from Panama, from whence it may be sent to La Vera Cruz, under a notion of its being reshipped for Peru, and so bring it to Havana there to join the flota, and so come for Spain, or send it home in running ships. And our reason for this suggestion is not only for the above difficulties that must and will attend upon bringing the bullion now at Panama to Spain, round Cape Horn or by way of Buenos Aires, but because of the facility and dispatch with which it may be transported from Panama to Acapulco, and so by land to La Vera Cruz, which is what has been often practiced by the Spaniards, even when there was no blockade at Porto Bello, nor fear of enemies, as the conveniency for Spain has offered, for navigation from Panama to Acapulco. is very safe and easy, and the carriage from thence to La Cruz is neither so difficult nor expensive as that between Lima and Buenos Aires. This, my lord, is what occurs to us worthy of your lordship's notice. We are with the utmost respect and submission, lord, your lordship's most devoted and most obedient humble servants, Woods Rogers and Jonah Dennis. I would like to point out, basically, this is a nice long way of saying what this map shows. There are currents, there are various routes. The safest route for the Spanish to do is all the way up, like see there, from here to Acapulco across to Vera Cruz, and that's the safest route. But it takes the longest, and it's to an extent complicated. It also requires you loading into multiple ships, you doing land carriage, lots of chances of people to be light-fingered. Okay. The quickest route is to go from Portobello. But the moment they're in a war, they're not going to go that route because they know that the added time, this voyage becomes very safe because of the time it takes to get round the Cape, round to South America, round to the Pacific. It means that it's longer for you to get your ships around there and less likely for you to get them around there in time to stop the fleet. The English have tried that before. And the cruise, well, the cruise through that particular sea, the Gulf of Mexico, I know people are trying to rename it, but it's the Gulf of Mexico, especially in this time it's called the Gulf of Mexico. Well, it's usually quite a good journey for them. However, if you can hit Portobello when the fleet's there, and you can get the treasure fleet when it's there, or blockade it when it's there, you then can dictate what they do. That's the idea. But the trouble is that area is rich in one particular resource, disease, yellow fever especially. Not just silver, yellow fever. The other problem is that Portobello has been captured twice by Drake in 1572 and 1595. Or rather, Nombre de Dios, which is where Portobello originally had been captured twice by Drake. And so they moved to Portobello, which they felt was a position they could secure better. They moved the settlement. So when they get there, the trouble is it's a confusion of their orders. Their orders are from Walpole to apparently blockade Portobello. So Hosier remains before it. Now, the orders are interesting when you consider Walpole. Walpole is one of the British Prime Ministers who is probably actually one of the most decisive when it comes to making war. And Robert Walpole is pretty aggressive, so my view is he probably sent instructions to blockade the port, presuming, and therefore you need to take this much force of you to blockade it, because I can't risk more force if I'm sending you to do more than as much force as I need to do if I'm sending you to do more than blockade. I have to send more force, but hoping that the innate aggression of the Royal Navy, which was hoped for at this point, and the desire for the treasure ships would do the rest and lead to something more proactive than a blockade. Unfortunately, it didn't. They captured several Spanish ships, but the Spanish had managed to unload its valuables, and it waited. And over a 6-month period, with them just languishing beyond the port, yellow fever starts killing off his sailors. In fact, Hosier is forced to return to Jamaica, where he recruits fresh crews. And then he goes back there. During his absence, the blockade was ineffective, and the Spanish treasure fleet had actually managed to ship out. That fleet was carrying 31 million pesos. It reached Spain on the 8th of March 1727. If it had been captured, that would have been a massive benefit to the war that was being fought at this point, because this, believe it or not, is part of the Anglo-Spanish War of 1727 to 1729. Yes, it's one of those wars where Spain keeps attempting to capture Gibraltar, and the British are basically not letting them capture Gibraltar and trying to make sure the cost of the war's elsewhere. It happens on a disturbingly regular basis, but what can I say? What can I say? In this particular operation, there really isn't much there. The blockade is a disaster. Eventually, Hosier is replaced by Edward St. Lo, because he dies from yellow fever himself. And it's one of these things which actually builds up to the Royal Navy working on A, the cleanliness of ships. It's experiences like this which make the Royal Navy obsessed with cleanliness aboard ships, and they still are obsessed with cleanliness aboard ships to this day. And 2, the whole vegetables thing, the whole limes, the whole everything, because health of crew affects things. Because if you have a healthier population as a whole, it makes them more capable of dealing with diseases when they start to come aboard. You're still going to lose some people. Some people get the disease worse than others. Some will be more likely to be affected than others. Some will be weaker than others. This is one of the really interesting things when you look at some of the studies done by navies into healthcare. They look at it and sometimes they look at it and go, hang on, this person who's affected is one of our strongest, most fit people. And they've been completely wrecked by this disease. And then there's other people who are less big, less brawny, less healthy, but that for them was basically a walk in the park. That's where you start to get the idea of, well, maybe there are other health issues which we can't see, which affect your ability to deal with disease. Maybe there is other causes. It starts to be discussed. One of the really interesting things in history to look at is medicine and development of medicine. And naval doctors are often far and ahead of their contemporaries back home. There is a reason why in the US the Surgeon General's uniform is far closer to is often a naval uniform, and often the public health service personnel, when they get to senior ranks, they're using naval ranks, because the long association with naval doctors being very experienced in a wide range of diseases, being very good for doing many different things, being both able to do surgery but also tropical diseases, infectious diseases, all those things, because they had to. They were one-person hospitals. And it's experiences like this with the Royal Navy especially, which is what generates up the need for them, but also the need for greater investigation and study of their crews and how to treat them, how to care for them. To this day, kind of like food aboard ships, naval care aboard ships usually is absolutely first-rate. Because it has to be. Because the thing is, it's better to deal with problems early, quickly, and efficiently, so that you don't lose a crew member, than it is to leave it and then find you're suddenly short a critical crew person, or multiple critical crew people, because someone who was ill makes a mistake and that leads to another mistake, which leads to a big error. So you want to deal with things quickly. Naval healthcare becomes very quickly, and we're talking in the 18th century, itself, about preventative care, preventative healthcare. There is a reason why navies have always been hugely involved in the vaccine movement, etc., because for them, vaccinations are an amazing thing. We can get our crews to be prepared to fight diseases and give their bodies a prep against disease before they even get to the disease. That's brilliant. Because for navies, it's not a case of if they're going to get exposed to the disease, it's going to be when. And that's before we consider the sheer amount of effort they put into buying up supplies of mercury and other things to treat the diseases which sailors so often contract in the various ports they visit, and trying to teach the sailors how to avoid getting those diseases. There have been many a poor surgeon commander and surgeon lieutenant commander aboard ships who have grown grey trying to deal with that one, but we'll leave that to one side. Shameless book plug time. So, thank you for liking, sharing, subscribing, supporting the channel, helping it grow. I'm curious to see if the lights are showing up, and if the lights are lighting up, because they're supposed to with YouTube. They're supposed to. If I say subscribe, the subscribe button's supposed to light up. If I say like, the like button's supposed to illuminate. If I say press that bell and fill it in, make it solid, so you get notifications, and make sure notifications turn on for your phone for this app, it's supposed to light up and tell you all to do that. Now, I will say this, okay? Shameless Book Plug is all about me saying thank you for the supporting the channel, but shamelessly plugging my own book. There are more coming soon. And also usually passing on a bit of information. You see, Christmas is coming up when this comes out. I'm hopefully, in a couple of weeks when this comes out, heading off to Japan. But that's going to be if it depend upon your generosity and kindness and all the support you give. So that's always we hope, but we can never be sure. But still, Christmas is coming. The Historiathon is coming for 2025. More importantly than all that, there are a whole lot of content creators putting their hearts and soul into this stuff. You see, that bell next to the subscribe button, that matters. Because if you leave it alone, it's allocated according to the algorithm, according to Google. Any step you do to change that increases the likelihood of you being shown videos. This first step means that the algorithm goes, well, okay, you're more likely to want to see the videos from this person, so we're going to give them a higher profile in your personal algorithm, in your personal display. The filled in bell, ooh, that says, I don't care about your algorithm, I want to see all the output from this creator. And that really helps them, because I swear, YouTube tracks people who are subscribers, they track their level of subscribers, they track whether they're members of a channel. I swear they track this all as data points. They must do. Because why else collect all the data if you're not going to use it? Because if you're collecting all the data and you're not using it, you're spending a whole lot of money, wasting a whole lot of coding time, maintaining capability, which you're not making any use of. So you wouldn't do that. And that it all factors into how the algorithm works and how people get promoted. So it really does matter. So thank you. With that being said, our last one, the Battle of San Juan in 1797. So this one is... how do I describe it? Okay, so I've said in previous videos that the British have a habit of doing Gallipoli-style operations again and again throughout their history. It's almost every other couple of generations we need to relearn the lessons of Gallipoli of don't signal your opponent where you're going to attack. We haven't so far done it since Gallipoli, but let's give it time. Let's give it time. We can hope we won't do it again. We can hope we've paid enough blood on this one, but hey-ho. So, when Spain and France signed the Second Treaty of San Ildefonso in 1796, they quickly find themselves at war with Britain. And, well, Britain decides to target their colonies. So they sent Admiral Sir Henry Harvey to pick up Sir Ralph Abercrombie's army in Barbados, and they go and capture Trinidad from the Spanish, which they do very quickly. And initially, everyone thinks that's the British happy. But then they turn up off San Juan. There's a problem. They have tried with San Juan. Lots of people have tried with San Juan before. And the governor, Field Marshal Don Ramon de Castro Gutierrez, had mobilized approximately 4,000 militia, plus 200 Spanish garrison troops, 300 French privateers, and 2,000 armed peasantry, which differ from militia in that they had no prior training, plus some paroled prisoners. And he also had 376 cannon, 35 mortars, 4 howitzers, and 3 swivel guns. In return, Abercrombie had brought 7,000 troops with him. And Henry Harvey has 68 warships with 600 guns. This sounds like it should work, but Abercrombie is... How do I describe Sir Ralph Abercrombie? He's a theoretically capable general, but he has a book, and he goes by that book, and he doesn't deviate from that book. And if that book works, great, he wins the battle. If it doesn't work, no, it doesn't work. And so the British arrive on the 17th of April, 1797. They arrive. And they find themselves facing a very entrenched, well-armed militia and formation. And so Abercrombie decides he's going to land with 3,000 troops and take control of Canreros. And, well, unfortunate for him, Gutierrez, aka Castro Gutierrez, immediately moves his forces to Escambron and what was considered the Spanish first line of defence, which he'd had prepared just in case something happened. Realistically, if they'd shown up, made sure to time themselves to arrive at night, and landed immediately at night, they might have been able to do something like this, but that's not what they've given themselves. They've landed in the day, which you can understand. It's very treacherous waters. You don't know. You're unfamiliar with them. You're going to land in daylight. But he brought in 3,000 troops to a fight where the opponent has nearly 7,000. And he has 7,000 himself, but many of them back on board the ships. And so an artillery duel starts with the forts of San Juan and San Antonio. Well, that's the fort of San Juan. Not a massive fort, but enough to cause problems, enough to cause issues. Realistically, it's a fort which should have been taken by infantry storm while ships were bombarding it. If you look at it, you can tell why I'm saying this. It is very strong against the seaward side. Against the landward side, if you can get infantry behind it and it can attack it, you can take it. There isn't enough places to hide and secure yourself for. With enough fire coming in, suppressing the personnel on the top, you can do it. But they don't get that. Further Spanish forces start to put pressure on British positions, that he's bringing up his various forces, and eventually the Spanish managed to recapture the Martin Pena Bridge, which means they have a far more secure line of defence, and this is again a loss. They have Spanish personnel raiding various British lines, bringing back prisoners. Why do I say cousins? Well, because two of the more famous leaders are Jose Pepe Diaz and Sergeant Francisco Diaz. And they are both grabbing prisoners and bringing them back. And eventually the Spanish crossed the Bucaron Inlet, and so the British pulled back even more. And so on the 1st, 2nd of May, the British withdraw, leaving behind their arms, stores and ammunition. And it's just an embarrassment, realistically, isn't it? It's just an embarrassment. And it is. It is an absolute massive embarrassment. But I have to admit, after this, the British do carry on to some interesting things. The Battle of Diamond Rock takes place in this war, and that's always a particularly interesting one to me. There are the various British invasions of the River Plate, which are equally interesting and intriguing, and exactly of how not to do things. In fact, a lot of this war is based upon tries to be based upon surprise, and sometimes the failure to achieve surprise, because here's the first thing that can cause you to fail to achieve surprise. Your opponent can just be well organised and prepared. You see, the thing is, surprise as a tactic is supposed to be this really great thing, and it is a really great thing as long as your opponent is unprepared. It's one of those things in history which comes up time and time and again. Is surprise a decisive weapon, a decisive methodology in warfare? The answer is it can be, if you can have your opponent focused elsewhere and unprepared. If your opponent is prepared, if your opponent is organised, if your opponent has personnel in place who understand their mission and are doing the jobs that are required of them to actually fulfill that mission, then it doesn't tend to work. Strategic surprise is a different matter. See, if you can lure your opponent to believing you're going to be attacking elsewhere, so that whilst they still have forces which are alert and capable in the place where you land, they don't have enough forces there, so you can land with overwhelming numbers, that's a different matter. You see, the problem here, realistically in this scenario, is that you're depending on surprise to allow you to overwhelm the resources which are present at this particular site and location. It might work. It might work. It's probably not going to. And the reason I say it's probably not going to is because, again, he's organised. And yes, you brought a whole load of warships with you. You've brought a whole load of ships of the line with you. And that's capable. That's important. There's a whole lot of cannon you've got. 600 plus cannon across your ships. But realistically, if you're doing this, you've taken Trinidad. That's good. That was a battle and a half. You now want San Juan. San Juan is good. But you need to have even more troops to take San Juan. More troops. And here's the really bad thing about this one. The British had attacked San Juan in 1595, 1598. The Dutch had attacked in 1625. There is later on a battle at San Juan between Chile and Peru. But, you know, there are various attacks on it as a position. This is the reality of the history. It's Puerto Rico. It's a critically important place in the Spanish Caribbean. It's a critically important place to this day in the American Caribbean. But you aren't going to take it cheap. And if you are going for surprise, you need a lot better information. You need the information to be able to do the night assault. If they could have done the night assault in the San Juan in Puerto Rico in night, they could have taken the city. And if they'd taken the city, they could maybe get the island of Puerto Rico. Maybe. It's going to not be easy. The Spanish have been there a long time. But it's also not the biggest island in the world. I'm sorry if there are any Puerto Ricans who are out and having me saying this, but you're not the biggest island in the world. And realistically, if the British had brought maybe about 12,000 troops to them, which is, again, not out of the realms of possibility for forces they've shipped around at by this point, they'd have had a chance, especially after taking Trinidad. Landing with 3,000 troops automatically puts you at a disadvantage. You then have to decide whether you're going to add more or add less. And this is the trouble of having Abercrombie doing this. He has a book. It's a good book, but if things don't go according to the book, he's in trouble. And Harvey's not much help either. As admirals go, the Royal Navy's had better. They have. He's okay, but the Royal Navy's had better. Anyway, that being said, I want you to think about what other tactics are actually dependent upon your enemy not being good at their job. What other famous tactics, which are supposed to be these great war-winning strategies, are actually dependent upon your enemy not being good at their job. We've done surprise here. There are others. What else we got coming up? Well, there are some of those things are going to be answered shortly, and will start appearing in these things shortly. But it's a bit of a surprise moment. You can probably see now because they're probably scheduled as premieres. Because they'll be scheduled as Tuesday videos, so they'll be up as premieres. Anyway, thank you for watching. Take care, and hope you enjoyed. And if you liked the video, please do like, share, and subscribe. It really does help the channel grow, and it's very kind and helpful of you to do so. Thank you.